Hello students, you are welcome to today's lesson, and today we shall be taking the part 4 of the topic we have been studying, that is diversity of living things classification, the part 4 of it. Alright, so let us now look at phylum Chlorophyta. Now in this phylum we have organisms such as the Chlamydomonas, we have the Chlorella, we have Ova, also have the Volvox. These are some organisms that we can find in this particular phylum of the kingdom Protista. Now they are normally found in aquatic and of course terrestrial habitat. So we have some found in aquatic habitat and we have some found in the terrestrial habitat. For the aquatic, they are both marine and of course fresh water organisms. Let's look at the main characteristics of organisms in this particular phylum. They possess chloroplast that has chlorophyll for photosynthesis. So as the name suggests, phylum Chlorophyta, this tells you that they have chlorophyll, or they have chloroplast which contains chlorophyll for photosynthesis. So remember that they can undergo photosynthesis. So let's notice. Number 2 is that they possess no roots. They have no roots, they have no stems, they have no leaves. So they are not plants. Note it. They have no roots, they have no stems, they have no leaves. So let's take note of this one. They also possess the paranoid for storing starch. They possess paranoid for storing starch. So they have a starch storing material called the paranoid, and it helps them to store their starch. So let's take note of that one. And of course, they have cell wall that is surrounded by a material called a mucilage. So they have a cell wall surrounded by a mucilage. So take note of that one. Then lastly, they do not have vascular tissues. They lack vascular tissue. Remember, when we say vascular tissues, we're talking about the xylem and the phloem. These particular organisms do not have vascular tissues. So let's take note of this. So in your shot now, we have the Chlamydomonas, that is on your top left corner. On the top right, we have the Chlorella. On your down left corner, we have the Ova over here nicely. Then on your down right corner, we have the Volvox. So these are some organisms in this particular phylum Chlorophyta. Let us take the next phylum under this particular kingdom. Now the phylum Rhodophyta. We also call them red algae. Commonly we call them red algae. And now organisms under this kingdom, we can talk of the Plumeria, the Galaxora, and of course the Glacilaria. These are some few organisms we can talk about under this phylum. Now they are mostly marine organisms. They are found in aquatic habitat, especially in marine waters. Let's look at their main characteristics or their main features. Now these organisms here, they are all multicellular organisms. They are multicellular. It means that they are made up of many cells. They are made up of many cells. So let's take note of that one. Then number 2 is that they have a red pigment called the phycoerythrin, which mask the green pigments. So if you see them looking red because of the red pigment called phycoerythrin, which covers or masks the green pigment. So let's take note of that one. Then number 3 is that they are photosynthetic. It means that there is a green pigment, alright, there is a chlorophyll that helps them to trap sunlight for photosynthesis. Just that the chlorophyll is marked or it is covered with the phycoerythrin. So you will not see the green pigment, you see rather the red pigment instead of green. Then lastly, they possess a structure we call the holdfast, which helps them to attach themselves firmly to surfaces. So you have the holdfast that helps them to attach themselves firmly to surfaces. In your shot now is the Galaxora. So that is an image of the Galaxora here nicely. So take a look at it closely. Alright, let's look at the very last phylum under the kingdom Protista. That's the phylum Phaeophyta. And these organisms are normally called the brown algae. Organisms here could include Fucus, we have Sargassum, we have Laminaria, and we have the Alaria. These are some few organisms under the phylum Phaeophyta. Organisms here too are marine organisms. They are marine organisms, so they are found in marine waters. They are found in marine waters. So let's take note of that one. Now let's look at the main features or the main characteristics of organisms in the phylum Phaeophyta. Now one is that they have a brown pigment called the fucoxanthin. So they have a brown pigment that we call the fucoxanthin. So that's one of the characteristics, or that's the main characteristic of organism and the phylum Phaeophyta. Next is that they also have a holdfast. They have a holdfast that they use for firm attachment to surfaces. So for them to be able to attach themselves firmly to surfaces, they use the holdfast. It's a structure that is found on them that helps them to hold onto surfaces very firmly. And lastly is that they have or they possess air sacs or air bladder, which increases their buoyancy to float on water for photosynthesis. So because they need the sunlight for photosynthesis, they have air sacs, and these air sacs reduce their densities, thereby increasing their buoyancy, and so they come up on the water and they float, so they can receive enough sunlight for photosynthesis. And this tells you that they also have chlorophyll, but just that the chlorophyll is covered by the fucoxanthin, so that they look brown. So let's take note of this one as well. In your short here we have sargassum and we have fucus. On your left hand side, that's the sargassum, you can see there. The right hand side, you can see the fucus. These are some examples of organisms in the phylum Phaeophyta, in the kingdom Protista. Now let us look at the next kingdom we're going to discuss. That is kingdom Animalia, the animal kingdom. And this kingdom comprises of all animals you can talk about. So let's note this. Now this kingdom has several features, or the organisms in this kingdom have a lot of features, but we focus on the main features. We focus on those ones only. The very first feature I'm going to talk about is that they are all multicellular organisms. This means that they are all many-celled. So if you take one organism, there are so many cells you can find within one organism. You can find more than one cell. So they are multicellular organisms. So let's take note of that. Number 2 is that they are all eukaryotic. If you can recall our previous lesson, the word eukaryotic is a two-part name. The U means true, the karyon means nucleus. So eukaryotic means that the organisms have a true nucleus. When I say true nucleus, what does it mean? It means that they have a nuclear material which is surrounded by a nuclear membrane. So let's take note of this. Then, of course, organisms in this kingdom too, they lack chlorophyll. They do not have chlorophyll. This tells you that they can't undergo photosynthesis. So they are not autotrophs. The next one is that organisms here too, most of them have a nervous system for coordination and control. So most of them have nervous system for coordination, except the sponges. The sponges, they do not have nervous system, but then most animals have nervous system for coordination. So let's note it. And the very last characteristic I'm going to talk about is that they are heterotrophic. It means that they do not prepare their own food, but they rather obtain food from plants and other animals. They can't prepare their own food, so they are heterotrophic. Now in this kingdom, there are 8 phyla. There are 8 subdivisions or 8 phyla under the kingdom Animalia. We shall be looking at all the 8 phyla, and then we'll go ahead to discuss them one by one. The very first phylum I'm going to talk about here is the phylum Cnidaria. We call them Cnidarians. So that's the first phylum. The second one is the phylum Annelida. That's the annelids, or we call them the segmented worms. Then the next one is the phylum Platyhelminthes. We call them the flatworms. The next one is the phylum Mollusca. They are the soft body worms. So let's take note of that one. The next one is the phylum Nematoda. And they are also called the roundworms. Phylum Nematoda, roundworms. Then the next one is the phylum Arthropoda. These ones, We spoke of them earlier when you were in school. Phylum Arthropoda, the arthropods. The next one is the phylum Echinodermata, the echinoderms. They are also the other phylum we can find under the kingdom Animalia. A very last phylum in which you and me, we do belong, is the phylum Chordata. The phylum Chordata, the chordates. So you and myself, we belong to this particular phylum Chordata. Now let us note the following key things. Now the phylum Cnidaria and the phylum Echinodermata, they have radial symmetry, or they are radially symmetrical. It means that for these organisms, they can be divided along more than one plane to get equal halves. So we say they are radially symmetrical. The phylum Mollusca, they are asymmetrical. It means that they can't be divided along any plane to get any equal half. So they are asymmetrical. The word a means without, and then symmetry, you add it, so without symmetry. So they don't have symmetry. Then the very last one is that the rest of the phyla, that is the others we spoke of, apart from Mollusca and Cnidaria and Echinodermata, they have bilateral symmetry. It means that these ones can be divided along just one plane to get two halves that are of mirror images. So that is that for this as well. We shall now take each of the phyla we've talked about in our previous slide and then discuss them into details. The first phylum we are going to talk about is phylum Cnidaria, the Cnidarians. And we look at their main characteristics. Now, organisms in this phylum, they are radially symmetrical. I mean that they have radial symmetry. Their body can be divided along more than one plane to get equal halves. So let's note it. Then of course they are also diploblastic. Diploblastic, and this means that they have two body layers. They are diploblastic. Let's take note of that. They have two body layers. Let's take note of it. Means that they have the ectoderm and then the endoderm. They don't have mesoderm. Let's note it. The next one is that their mouth is surrounded by tentacles bearing stinging cells called cnidoblast or nematocysts for defense. So they have tentacles that bear stinging cells that we call the cnidoblast or the nematocysts that they use to defend themselves when there is danger. So let's note it. And of course, they also do not have excretory or respiratory system. They don't have any excretory or respiratory system. So let's take note of that. Then they also reproduce both sexually and asexually. Now they have a gastrovascular cavity with single opening as both mouth and anus. So the gastrovascular cavity has just one opening, and that opening serves the function of both mouth and anus. That is where they feed through, and that is where their feces also pass. So the mouth part or the anus is just one single opening. So let's take note of that one. Then lastly, their life cycle has an asexual stage called the polyp and a sexual stage called the medusa. So these are some few characteristics, or the main characteristics we can talk about for the phylum Cnidaria. Now in the phylum Cnidaria, there are three main classes we are going to talk about. So in this particular phylum, it is also subdivided into three main classes. Now the classes include, we have class Hydrozoa. Example, we have the Hydra here, we have the Portuguese man of war, and we have the Obelia. These are some organisms under the class Hydrozoa. We have class Scyphozoa, and we have the jellyfish and then the Aurelia. These are organisms under the class Scyphozoa. Then we have the class Anthozoa. We have the sea anemone and then the corals. These are the three main classes we can talk about under the under the phylum Cnidaria. So in your shorts are some examples of Cnidarians. The very first one in the top left scanner is the Aurelia. If you come sideways to the one just beside it on your right, that is what we call the Hydra. And you come to our very last end on your right, that's the coral. So these are corals. Look at how beautiful nature is. So that's the coral. This is what we call the coral reef. When we come down to a down left corner, this is the Portuguese man of war. Then on our right hand side, down here, we can see what we call the jellyfish. So these are some examples of Nigeria. In your short here too are also some flatworms. That's the very first one you see here on your left. I have some examples of flatworms that I've listed for you here. Then of course, on your right hand side, there is this another picture of the Portuguese man of war. Now the next phylum we're going to talk about under the kingdom Animalia is the phylum Platyhelminthes. We normally call them the flatworms. They have several characteristics, but we shall look at just the main features of organisms in this particular phylum Platyhelminthes. The very first one is that they are triploblastic. This means that they have 3 body layers. So they have an outer ectoderm, a middle mesoderm, and then an inner endoderm. So they have 3 body layers. They are also organisms that exhibit bilateral symmetry. So they show bilateral symmetry, means that their body can be divided along just one plane, a single plane, to give 2 equal halves that are mirror images of each other. So let's take note of that one. The third one is that they are dorsoventrally flattened. So they are flat. When you say dorsoventrally flattened, dorsoventrally here means that their dorsal part and then their ventral side. The dorsal is the top view, the ventral is the belly view. The 2 are flat like this. They are flat, like the way a paper looks like. So we call them flatworms. So let's note this. Now they also have a single mouth. They have a single mouth, but they do not have anus. They lack anus. So let's take note of that one. Then of course they are usually hermaphrodites. It means that they possess both the male and the female sex organs. So if you take just one flatworm or one platyhelminthes or just one flatworm, it has both the male and the female sex organs. So let's note it. So they are hermaphrodite. They are hermaphroditic. Let's take note of that one. The very last one is that their main excretory organ is the phlegm cell. So they have what we call phlegm cells that help them to excrete waste materials, or help them to excrete metabolic waste materials. So let's take note of this one. Now the phylum Platyhelminthes also has 3 main classes. It has 3 main subgroups or classes. And these are, we have the class the Tabellaria, we have the class Trematoda, and we have the class Cestoda. So Tabellaria, we have Trematoda, and then Cestoda. These are the 3 main classes under the phylum Platyhelminthes. Alright, so all too soon we have come to the end of today's lesson. I hope you've enjoyed yourself. So you take these questions and you do as your assignment. The first one is that you have to state 4 characteristics of organisms in the kingdom Animalia. Number 2 is that you are to list the 8 phyla under the kingdom Animalia. And lastly, you are to state the classes under the following phyla, that is phylum Cnidaria and phylum Platyhelminthes. In our next lesson, we shall be looking at the part 5 of this particular topic. Do have a good evening. Bye-bye.